In Conflict, a representação oficial portuguesa na 17ª Exposição Internacional de Arquitetura da Bienal de Veneza, em 2021, integra um ciclo de 9 debates. In Conflict propõe revisitar uma seleção de processos da arquitetura nacional pós-25 de Abril, pautados por um amplo debate público e pelo envolvimento dos poderes políticos, da imprensa e da sociedade civil. Iremos dar início à sessão de debate. Agradecemos aos nossos parceiros oficiais, aos coordenadores dos eventos, aos participantes e a todo o público.
Boa tarde. En primer lugar, Anna Puigjaner, gostaríamos de agradecer o convite a propor de moderar aqui este encontro do pavilhão de Portugal na Bienal de Venecia, acolhido pela Trienal de Lisboa. Muito obrigado a todos os membros da curatoria de In Conflict, do Estúdio DEPA, João Crisóstomo, Carlos Acevedo e Luís Sobral, e também a Filipa Magalhães e Miguel Santos por toda a ajuda. E também muito obrigado ao público por sua assistência. Disculpad el portugués malísimo. Now I'm going to talk in English because Angelika has to. When Anna and I received the invitation to organize this event entitled Domesticity Matters, we wanted to detect practices around housing that propose new ways of living beyond those of the real estate markets. At a time when standard commercial housing appears to have few significant differences around the Western world, we believe that it's important to discuss and unveil housing alternatives able to open new territories. We have invited two studios, one from the north and another one from the south of Europe, which work critiques established real estate structures. On the one hand, the German studio B+, based in Berlin, has spent years exploring the limits of urban and building regulations. With the Terrassenhaus Berlin, built from 2014 to 2018, they updated the typology of the terrace house, where the loss of public space that accompanied the site's expensive development was compensated by spacious semi-public terraces. Terrassenhaus Berlin is to be seen both as a built agreement and a social project, in which users and visitors share the space. On the other hand, the cooperative studio Lacol belongs to a local cooperative tradition in Catalonia, in Spain. They have built La Borda Cooperative Housing, finished 2 years ago, a self-organized promotion in which users have access to non-speculative housing, all the while defining value through a collaborative structure. The project also responds to a new local policy regarding cooperative housing conducted by the mayor Ada Colau. I started presenting the first guest is Angelika Hinterbrandner from B+. B+, before known as Brandlhube Plus, is a collaborative practice founded in 2006 by Arno Brandlhube in Berlin. The practice is devoted to the idea of collaboration with other practices, disciplines, and individuals. The work includes architectural and research projects, exhibition, publications, and political interventions. Our guest, part of the studio, is Angelika Hinterbrandner. Studied architecture in Graz University of Technology and at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. She has worked for MVRDV, Buchle Bundle Architekten, and further as a project and research assistant at Technische Universität Graz. From 2018 to 2019, worked as an editorial assistant at the magazine Arch Plus, the German magazine. And since then, she has been working with Brandlhube Plus, or Bay Plus, and she also is part of Context Tour, a digital magazine spinning around architecture. In parallel, she's enrolled in the program Leadership Digital Innovation at the Universität der Künste in Berlin. Thanks, Angelika, it's your turn.
Thank you for this nice introduction, Moses, and thank you as well for making this possible, like doing this hybrid event with us. You basically already explained the project, so I'll keep it short and sweet. I will talk about the Terrassenhaus, and I hope you see the slides. Yeah, maybe we can get into the slides, and then I'll start. Yeah, perfect. Just so you know, I'll give you a sign when the slide needs to switch to the next one, so don't wonder if I say next, please. As Moses introduced the studio already, you know already that we are working in a lot of collaborations, and the project I will talk about today is or was a collaboration between Brandlube plus MD Berlin, like the two partners that were part of the team until last year, and Mukpetset Architekten that basically took care of the realization of the project and are actually situated in the building themselves. They have their office there, so they basically executed the building and am now experiencing the building there. I will give you an oversight of the story, like how the client found us, and walk you through the building basically. And after that, I will refer to the very first topic we heard from Moses, the topic of property, because that is actually quite an important topic in Berlin at the moment or overall, and was very important for the project itself as well. What you're seeing here is the building from the back, let's say. So basically looking from the southern side, where there are kind of like train rails going by, and next beside the building there is a climbing hall and some typical housing buildings. The building is situated in Wedding, an area that is still developing, let's say, that is not yet as gentrified as the middle of the city Mitte in Berlin. So there was, at the time when Olivia Reynolds, the client, found the site, was still a lot of potential. So Olivia, the woman who started and initiated the project itself, basically came to the Brandlube Plus in Brunnenstraße and said she wanted to do a project with us because she knew like how we were working, and said, okay, I want this very simple, clear and clean building, let's do this together. So she found this site that at that time was empty and basically uninteresting for developers that are searching for like easy plots, let's say, because the plot was used before as a car working area, so the soil was basically not usable anymore, and there was a legal framework that made it difficult to work on there because the area is basically housing, but on this side it was only allowed to develop it as a commercial building because the area had at that time no binding land use plan. So Olivia came with this site, and the office looked at it and said, wow, okay, this could have potential, so let's develop it and make it a usable space again. So the first thing we actually did as an office was not really thinking about architecture, but how to finance the project, because Olivia, a woman, had quite some difficulties to get the funding or the money to do the project itself. So there was this idea created of having this terraced house. The first design was made, and then she, together with someone from the team, went to the bank and asked for the funding. So we can jump to the next slide. The project basically as an architectural object is very much based on the circulation. So the circulation is externalized. So you have the terraces with the stairs you saw before that are, as Moisés said before as well, that is basically the core concept, externalized. So the urban context is basically flowing into the building itself. Next slide, please. At the next picture, you can see, in the best case, the building when it is used. We had a big opening there, so we are hopefully looking at it, or you can see it from the street perspective. No, I'll just go on. Yeah, now perfect. So you can see the stairs and as well the huge terracing. So with the circulation outside, it's basically always possible to enter the whole building and to walk up until the top. So this means the public, or like you as a random person, can go there, enter through the door, next slide, and go up to the terrace. Now we're kind of like entering, you're entering with me on the next image. You can see the windows and the huge door at the side as soon as it's switched. Yeah, perfect. So to the street side, you basically have only glass and huge openings, so the light can fall in. And on the lower floor, we have a restaurant and an exhibition space. So the ground floor is basically open and public as well. So you can anytime walk through and enter from behind. So now we're walking through and going to the next slide, walking into the garden basically, and looking at the circulation. And from the back, it's a bit more closed because we have the huge curtains that are in front of the facades to basically shadow the building. As this is the south side, the sun is very strong. So there was something needed to shield. And this area, there is this kind of like in-between area between the building itself and the curtain. So it's like, let's say, a meter of space is as well a shield, or like it helps to keep it a bit more private where it needs to be, or you can fully open up. So now, as we are the visitors, we can basically go upstairs. And we're going to the next slide, please. So this external circulation is, as you saw, not only a built object. That's why I called the lecture as well, architecture as an argument. It's as well a built idea, let's say. So that is as well one of the main ideas of the office, or what we're doing very specifically and on purpose, is trying to build a main concept into the building itself. So through the circulation that is outside and all the walkable space, it's basically inscribed into the building itself that people need to exchange and talk with each other, because there is no way to enclose yourself in the room, because you kind of like need to use the circulation and you need to be there and communicate, or like there is basically no chance to escape the building itself. So let's go on with the slides. We go through some plans. You can go to the next one and the next one. That is just to see how the basic structure works in section and plan. So now we're in the ground floor, where you can see the different setups of the ground floor. So on the lower floor, the building is very extended. So you have basically two areas and two lighting situation, and the depth of the ground floor as well defines the usage of the space. That's why we have the restaurant and the exhibition space exhibition space in the ground floor, because that is the light situation, or like these usages are perfect for the lighting situation. Okay, next slide, please. Through the externalization of the circulation, another thing that happens is that you're more free as an architect to design the inner space, because you don't need to, you don't have to think about the circulation inside, because it's only outside. So as you saw on the ground floor before, there are 2 cores with elevators that are going up, but besides that, it's a free space floor plan. Next slide, please. So we're jumping inside. That's on the ground floor. That's one of the, that's the exhibition space that was at that time used as an office, or like it was only slightly furnished, because Erika, who is living there as well, documented the building at the very beginning. And then we turn around, next slide, and looking at outside. So you get an idea of how the lighting situation with the curtains seem like. So the curtain is very thin, so the light still comes in, but you're shielded from people that are outside. And if you want to, you just open up the curtain. Next slide, we're walking up to the stairs. And here you see how deep the terraces actually are. So it's really an extended living space, let's say. And at that point, that was at the very beginning of the building, when it was just finished, it looked still empty. Now when you go there, whenever you're in Berlin, I recommend you to go there. It's already full of green space. I actually didn't include a rendering, but Olivia dreamed of this kind of like huge garden and of the greens just growing down. And the water is basically going down as well. So yeah, let's see if this huge jungle will happen. Next slide, please. In the inside, the building is kept very minimal, let's say. What was built was only the minimum for everyone. So it's basically concrete, and the separating walls are wooden. And the users were up to like do whatever they wanted from there. So like to keep the rent low as well, you only got this basic layout, and then everyone was free to add on more. Next slide. This is at the opening. We had an Art Plus event there, presenting the concept, talking with Olivia, Muk and Arno about how the whole development went. And that is when the building was used the first time, basically. And here you can see how it really works when there are a lot of people. Next slide, please. On the upper floors, the depth is not as huge, so the ground floor is not as long. And these are the floors that can actually be used as well for housing. So in all, that was kind of like connected to what I said at the very beginning, as there was no real Wehplan, as you say in German, so there was no usage defined before. The floor plan is adjustable in a way, so you can use the upper floors as housing. So the building can be transformed, and actually is already transformed by some users in this way. So the ground floor or the floor plans are pretty adaptable. Next slide. One last time, I show you some greens and the curtain, and we're walking up through the last floors. Next slide. Here you see the rooftop that is pretty spacious as well at the right side. And there are happening a lot of community things. I think during the Corona pandemic, they even put a little sauna there, and the housing, or like the community at the house, met there and had some chats. And yeah, it was really used or is used in a very nice way. So we're switching to the last slide on the project. Here you see the terrace in use with this very nice view. That is actually another reason why so many people are going there, because the view is very amazing. So 2 last slides on the project, and then I'll switch to the property topic a bit. So the basic idea, as Moisés said at the very beginning, was to not only build something there that can be used by a community, but at the same time giving back the property or the land, let's say, that was taken by the building. So through the extension and the terraces, there is even more space, let's say, because you have this overhang, and then you have the loft at the ground floor level as well that is open and publicly available. But at the same time, of course, we had to, or like, we reflected on the process, how it went and how the building is used now. And the thing is that what we actually wanted to reach, to really enable ateliers and rents that are very low, was unfortunately not reached to the extent we wanted it to reach, due to several facts. The client had to go up with the rent. So now the program of the house tends a bit to a startup-y, let's say, user group, what we actually didn't want to have. But yeah, we learned from that for the next projects, because this part of designing the program and thinking about how the project can be like realized in a way so that the long-term goal is reached is ingrained now even more in the practice. And from that, I would like to go back to the slides again and jump two more to Berlin Land and Property. And just to give you an idea, I will keep it very short. One more slide, 2 more, other direction. 1 more. Okay, I'll talk about another collaboration we did with ArcPlus on property, because the topic is very, as I said at the very beginning, pretty important for Berlin at the moment, because the renting prices are pretty much crazy at the moment. Maybe you heard about several political decisions that were made in Germany, Mietendeckel, that kind of topic, like how do we deal with our rents? That didn't lead to a solution yet. And the underlying problem, let's say, is how Berlin dealt with land and property over the past years, since the 1990s, when the German wall came down. Next slide, please. And as I said at the very beginning, we as an office are not only working on projects, we use projects to, let's say, build the argument, but the publication work and the work on theoretic backgrounds is very important as well. We did a collaboration with ArcPlus on property that is called the property issue. And I'll just quickly go through a graphic that shows how much land was sold by Berlin as a state. Perfect. So this is 1990 or 89, before the fall of the wall, when there was hardly, or like in this year, there was hardly any land sold. And then we flip through the years. Next slide. 10 years later, you can see, I hope you can see, I hope that's visible on the map. The white area is going up and up with the next slide and up with the next slide. And we jump until we see 21 million on the last slide. Yeah, perfect. So overall, Berlin sold from the 1990s to 2017. This is until when the data was gathered for this graphic. 21 million square meters of land in the, like that was kind of like done in the sense of, or like for consolidate the household of Berlin. They gave away a lot of land, and that led to the dynamics we do have now at the real estate market. It is very, very hard to buy land. It is very, very expensive to build something due to the land price, and the prices are then further moved on to the renters in the end. yeah, so we are currently, as an office, this is a very important topic and is integrated as well in our work. Yeah, so I'm very much looking forward to the discussion based on this very topic. And just to go back to the last two slides, if you're interested in the topic, there is more on the website that we just updated in the framework, or as well with publishing the 2G and the restructuring of the practice. So as we kind of realized that this economic base structure is so important, we're actually taking this as an even more important topic for the office and are integrating these aspects even more in the design process. So we're asking ourselves how economics and this, let's say, money, property, and of course, other topics like environmental aspects are needed to be integrated in the practice itself. And from that, I would like to hand over to the next speaker, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Angelika. The next guest is here. We have this combined, the double presentation, is Cristina Gamboa from Lacol. Lacol is a cooperative of architects founded in 2014 that works in the neighborhood of Sants in Barcelona, composed by 14 architects now, but you were more. They work from architecture towards social transformation, using architecture as a tool to intervene critically in the acting alongside in the environments that are closest to them. They root the activity in a horizontal system of labor, acting alongside society with justice and solidarity in mind. Among other works, they have designed several cooperative housing projects in Barcelona, like La Borda, that is going to be presented today. Cristina Gamboa is an architect and teacher. She studied in the Barcelona School of Architecture and Universitat Stuttgart. Co-founder of Lacol, she has focused on researching participative approaches to design and developing cooperative housing and housing policies tested on ongoing projects. She currently teaches at the Architectural Association in London and the Barcelona School of Architecture. So thanks, Cristina.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, and also congratulations for the work and the previous presentation. It was a pleasure to know more about the project. So, well, I titled the kind of the intervention infrastructures for sustainable living because it's also a topic that I wanted to introduce as part of also the introduction to Lacol, which also Moisés has done. It's important to say that, I wanted to say that Lacol nowadays, since 2 years ago, it's also part of a kind of a cooperative hub. We are sharing a space with 8 cooperatives of different fields, which is something that also is a way to reappropriate the city and establish these kind of new cultures and kind of new economies in the city. This is La Comunal, our new space and kind of a new public space for the city and the neighborhood with a library and a series of other projects. And the Lacol, in fact, started in 2009 because we were just finishing, well, but just as a kind of as a shared space. And since 2014, we are a cooperative. But in a way, it was kind of a long journey that we started also as students sharing spaces, and we finally we were established as a cooperative, basically because it was this kind of legal structure that it was an umbrella to develop our professional environment with dignity, with kind of the capacity to take decisions, because I think it's important to know that we finish our kind of studies basically in the middle of the crisis, and a crisis that it was also kind of started basically also with a housing crisis. So it was also a moment to redefine our roles of architects, so also by which forms of organizing and taking decisions and working. And after almost 11 years, we have, in a way, discussing about our goals. And the last months we were doing a kind of a strategic plan. And basically we said that we aim to generate community infrastructures for sustainability of life as a tool for eco-social transition through architecture, cooperativism, and participation. And this idea of infrastructures, such as our space, la comunal, but also the housing infrastructures, are essential for us in a way that they are spaces of resilience, of appropriation, of emancipation. And well, that's why I wanted to understand also sustainability in the broadest way possible, also from social, economical, environmental. So, and also taking this kind of feminist approach about economies of life. And bringing the kind of the context to Barcelona and Spain, I think it's important to understand that we came from a culture of property established since the dictatorship, and where kind of the economical motors were the construction, and the housing policies were based in the individual ownership, but also kind of how this is a way to become more conservative and linked to the family structure. So kind of the main challenges for our culture is this idea to kind of break the individual ownership, and also as a way to redefine even the kind of ways of, as a household, the ways to relate each other. But kind of certain important data. So Barcelona has around the 60% of individual ownership, around the 30% it's rents, but only the 2%, 1.5–2% is social housing. So we don't have kind of mechanism of controlling from the state, but so that's the reason also at the beginning of the project, how we can introduce new models that block speculation and allows to have an affordable and a stable housing stock in the city. So because through the speculation, many other kind of conflicts we have. So this idea of the right of the city, also kind of for several years, many problems about evictions, and also linked to the energy prices increase. So suddenly, many health issues are also linked to that. So our approach to the field of housing, it's also understanding in this cross-sectional way, talking about health, talking about the right to the city. And also, it's not a kind of a casualty that the project of La Borda, it's a project that came from a project that it was starting after the Occupy movement. So in May 2011, we were in the squares claiming for a political change, and a month after, we were kind of entering to Can Batlló, which has been a school for us. It's a kind of a bottom-up experience of the city transformation. It's a kind of a paradigmatic experience of how the neighborhood can claim and in a way restore and manage a piece of the city and all fabric. And I think sometimes we talk about social innovation, and we like to talk about social accumulation, because it was basically a heritage of social networks, autonomy movements and worker movements in the neighborhood that made possible that the neighborhood started to manage and transform the area little by little, step by step. And 1 year after, in 2012, from the assembly that it was managing the space, we realized that the housing, it was a shared need, and also in this moment, specifically in the middle of the crisis. So we started to discuss about which kind of new forms and models of property ownership and management can be introduced in Barcelona, looking at international experiences such Denmark, Uruguay, Switzerland, etc., etc. But I think it's important, this idea that it was the citizenship who took the initiative, so citizens as instigators, as a new model. And basically, this was the goals of La Borda: ensure the affordable and decent housing, avoid the speculative use of housing, and etc., linked to the new forms of coexistence, and making, for example, the most of the existing resources. So new values linked to the housing sector and to the building environment, which was not that present in the moment. And this idea of introducing kind of the third sector in the community and the non-profit as an agent to produce this model. Basically, the Catalonian model is based in it's a non-profit cooperative, which the cooperative is the owner of the building, so it's collective ownership, which is also the key tool to avoid the speculation. And the people who is member of the cooperative has the right of use one of the flats for the entire life. So there is a stability, but you are not the owner individually, so you cannot speculate. So super simple. And this also makes possible that the involvement of the community, so it's a community-led project. Also, because it's non-profit and avoids the speculation, it's affordable and inclusive, sustainable, as I was saying, in the broadest way possible, and replicable, which is something important, making also this idea of social and solidarity economy, so making a kind of an alternative economy, also as part of the goals, not the social market. And we used to talk about kind of its housing as a collective process, because it was a long journey since 2012 until the entrance at the building by the end of 2019. And it's interesting to understand how the architecture was in parallel to the legal and financial development, and also the way that the cooperative was organizing. So basically, there is a general assembly with different kind of committees of work, from architecture, legal, model of conviviality. So these commissions, these working groups, are kind of the link between Lacol as architects and the general assembly. So it was the space to share the evolution, to decide which topics have to be discussed. So it's kind of the main link of participation with the general assembly. And I wanted to also to introduce here that for us it was really important to look for historical reference. And of course the SAL was for us this idea of a process as a policy, kind of a new policies, that this idea of self-building the environment, the kind of the housing environment, but also taking kind of as a reference theoretical research and frameworks, such the work done by Turners, that says that the important thing about a house is what it does in the life of the dwellers, rather than what it physically is. What it did was kind of conclusions about the work in the informal settlements in South America. So this idea that the ethics in the life, it was really important for us. So entering fast to the project, sorry, I'm kind of being a bit longer. So this project was possible because it was a pioneer experience. So the municipality based with the legitimacy of the people involved in Campbell and management and working there, established agreement of leasehold of the land for 75 years to the cooperative, which means that the land is still public, but the people has to fulfill the criteria of public housing. And the second, for me, important point is that when we started to define the architecture, these kind of main points and characteristics of the model was essential to understand which kind of architectural strategies we can develop. So starting by the participation of the user, so knowing them and involving them in the process. The idea of collective ownership as also an opportunity to redefine the household, the units, and understand the building as an infrastructure. The third point was this idea of the community life. So they wanted to share spaces and kind of new rituals of coexistence. So also reprogramming the building. The fourth point, this idea of making the most of the resources, so the sustainability, introduce it as a vector that is also cross-sectional to the process. And the last part, affordability, because it's also a project that it's been funded by social economy with a really low budget. So since the first decision, it was also really important to understand the economical aspects. And as I was saying, this idea of self-management, we have the user, so we started with an interview kind of data. It was essential to understand like the household compositions, but also to have information and data that allows us to, in a way, challenge certain regulations. That it's also essential how regulations are affecting the design and are kind of being thought for the kind of standards. So, for example, we introduce a new regulation which avoids the construction of the parking, and it's something that is all present nowadays for other projects. So this idea also that the responsibility that we have as a project and as architects, in a way, to challenge and to questioning kind of the standards continuously, especially in the domestic realm. This idea of involvement, and also this idea of thinking about which is the communal life and the communal model. So also understanding kind of the different vectors for mobility, energy, economy, health care, defining what means home, kind of a collective home. And also in which way these kind of spaces and kind of practices are going to be developed since kind of the individual, the kind of the unit, certain kind of units for certain kind of needs, even who can share kind of the care of the kids, for example, so then the whole community, but also the neighborhood, because they don't want to be kind of isolated. They want to be open as infrastructure for the neighborhood. And then how these practices of these collective practices has an impact in terms of, for example, sustainability, but also if this is a kind of a lottery when we can see kind of the savings of water, energy, electricity, but if we look to the collective kitchen, for example, suddenly we have a totally balance in terms of gender distribution. So these spaces are also spaces of potential for the social transformation. And suddenly entering to the building, it was a plot in between two walls, kind of a real depth plot. So this idea of introducing a courtyard, which is also reminds a Spanish typology of corralas. It was also the core of the community, which is also a way to kind of establish this transition from the public realm, the street, to the common areas, this courtyard, arriving to the most private flats. But also, I think it's kind of really, really thin and blue, but also this courtyard is covered. So suddenly, this is also kind of an environmental mechanism. It's a collective saving strategy. And it's all the time this kind of discussions with the users about the organization of the program, the dynamics, but also the environmental effects of the infrastructure. So this is how is working, but also because it was important to understand that normally a kind of a developer, what it used to do is just basically reduce as much as possible the construction cost because they are not going to live there. So suddenly, when the user is involved, the priorities are changing, and the passive strategies, but with an active user, were part of the discussion. And the next step was this idea of collective ownership. So generating an open and flexible infrastructure with also introducing new legal mechanisms that allows the increase and the decrease of the units, so this flexibility, and using these yellow rooms as a matrix of rooms that can be interconnected as a continuous, but also as a discontinuous housing. But then this is something that can be organic, can change to time, because also the community, the families and the community is going to change. And this was also part of this idea of understanding that when the property is kind of broken, in the sense that this kind of all the building is part of a cooperative, new mechanism and strategies can to be developed. And also the levels of participation, how the infrastructure is defined, and it will be continued and finished through time by the users, establishing also certain decisions as the position of the kitchen, the entry of the bathroom, but totally non-hierarchical spaces that can be used as a living space, as a dining room, as a bedroom, etc., etc. So we were not talking about uses, we were just talking about kind of spaces, and each inhabitant will define it by themselves. And the last part also, once the environmental strategy was defined, once the programs and the distribution and the matrix of units to define the housing, the construction, and the cooperative take a risk to build in wood, which was not present, but it also was a kind of a way to see that other things can happen at the values as a cooperative in terms of environmental. It was kind of it was arriving to the extreme. So it was the highest building in this moment, building wood in Spain. But it was interesting that it was a kind of expensive system, but suddenly understanding the detailings, the finishings, the construction kind of temporalities suddenly became affordable and this is basically the result. How all these walls, which was structural, so basically the structure defined the spaces, all the distribution walls basically were a structure, and we can see kind of really small, how this kind of collage of different composition of households, of units, that it's something that will change through time, as I was saying, no? Basically, here we can see from the ground floor that it was, well, I cannot make it with a laser, but basically it was the first floor and the second floor, which in the north facade it's empty. Suddenly in the middle floors we close the courtyard with 4 flats in the north facade, but with a light from the courtyard, and suddenly also in the upper floors this kind of terraces in the 5th and 6th floors, and also kind of a garden terrace in the top floor. And also in this idea of affordability, kind of thinking all the time about phases of construction, about even self-construction, this idea of a naked infrastructure that is going to be finished through time, so also challenging the standards that were imposed basically by the market, no? And this idea of really simple and traditional some kind of strategies. This courtyard, which organized from the ground floor with a passage with this multi-purpose room, some guest rooms in the lowest part, and the different units organized around them. Kind of this space, which is also, you can see kind of the laundry, which is not closed yet. So this idea of something that the people has to finish, and it's also interesting because they know more how they are using, which are the needs. So also some kind of decisions are changing through time. This kind of also this aesthetics of also about kind of agriculture infrastructures or agriculture kind of devices that we are using for the courtyard, and all these spaces that are kind of used and appropriated for the users. And the same strategy inside the units, no? This non-finished housing that are being finished like for the different kind of doors, certain kind of partitions, also the kitchen, and then kind of each flat, it's totally different from the another one. No? So also this idea of the identity of the user that can be developed inside the flats. And just to finish, this idea of that the collective spaces allows to implement new measures, actions, habits, and routines. So there is a possibility of management, but also of monitoring, of understanding how it's the behavior of the building, and make people aware about environmental performances of their practices, and change with the temperature of the water, with reducing a machine which is not being used, establishing just some months ago the kitchen and a collective dinner which is prepared by a group of people, but also buying the food in the cooperative of consumers, which also is producing a kind of economy in the surroundings. So also something kind of environmental, but also economical and social effects. And also it was essential to study the building during the pandemics. No? Suddenly these in-between spaces were spaces of relation, where also the assembly had the possibility to establish new protocols of care, with understanding also the most vulnerable people, which was also the elderly, but also the kids, establishing a kind of a school organized by the fathers and the people and the volunteers, helping with mutual help people who couldn't go to shop. So, and also these spaces suddenly were kind of, the corridors were gyms, the terraces were kind of concert halls, and suddenly people felt really privileged to live in a space of as La Borda, and to have the control and the possibilities to expand the limits of the lockdown. And finally, this image from the street, no? How the building is kind of opening with this cooperative of consumers and this passage. And basically, I wanted just really briefly say that, which is interesting, is the idea that it's not a single building, it's a housing policy. No? The municipality introduced in the housing plan from 2016 to 2025 cooperative housing as one of the strategies to increase the affordable flats in the city. And this also allows us to develop kind of with the same principles as I was saying, new variations. And I will just, in 2 minutes, explain that, for example, this was and it's interesting to say that the municipality, what it also did they introduced kind of a boarding, kind of a space with all the entities and the municipality, but also even the social economy banking, to understand kind of the challenges of the model. And the first tool, the first action was, and has been 3 competitions to develop land, public land, but this is not an architectural competition. Basically, it's a development, so there has to be a community organized, and there has to be a multidisciplinary team helping them, from lawyers, economists, but also architects. So we had the opportunity in these 3 competitions. The first one was done in 2017, the second one 2019, 2020, and just a couple of months they started another one. So nowadays there are almost, I would say, 12 projects in the city being kind of ongoing projects in different kind of stages of the development. And basically, as I was saying, so we had the opportunity to work in a plot really close to kind of one of the rings. So we talk about pollution and how the infrastructure is also, it's kind of infrastructure that in a way treats the air and in a way recognize kind of the kind of a strong condition as a barrier with the transit of the traffic of the ring of this kind of highway, and also a park. So this idea of kind of accumulating layers and bringing the life in the south facade. So suddenly the corridors and the spaces of relation are in the south facade, but there's a series of thresholds to arrive to the housing, but also kind of courtyards, patios that brings the air from the park. So kind of, again, kind of how the environmental performance of the buildings also allows to go against something that it's one of the conditions of Barcelona with a high level of pollution, and again, an open infrastructure which allows different configurations. But this idea of the environmental performance was essential in those cases. And 2 of the ones that we finally won with the community, one was in Poblenou, and suddenly this was a really compact plot, and in access of different equipments from elderly housing, a health center, a high school, etc., etc. So suddenly the housing was part of, in a way, kind of equipment for the city. So we were kind of establishing the position of the corridors, also understanding the different condition of the surrounding, with a kind of also quite crowded street, and also a really close the high school. So understanding how the corridor can be also a threshold for the sun in the south facade, but also for the noise of the street and the pollution, and bringing the stairs and the community spaces in the corner, as we can see in the second drawing. No? Suddenly, how the spaces of interaction can be promoted in a vertical structure, and the building is kind of symmetric, understanding that there's different kind of circumstances of the surroundings, and also again kind of a reiteration, and also learning from the failures of Laborda and the mistakes. So also allowing to introduce again the wood in the structure, and these are images of these spaces of circulation, which are in the most privileged areas, kind of in the corner, and looking kind of the city of Poblenou. And we are almost finishing the construction just this month. Then in 2 months, people is going to start living, and the last one. Just I'm going to finish now. From the people who was in the waiting list of Laborda, a new community was organized. So Laborda is kind of, this is Can Batlló, so Laborda was kind of almost here. I wanted to check. So a group of people started, say it has no sense to be waiting to enter to Laborda when we are almost 50 people waiting and only 28 flats already full of people. So they organized themselves as another group, and they had the possibility with these new competitions of the municipality to access to this plot. So it was also kind of a total parallel project, really close to Laborda, and also with certain these synergies with the surrounding. So again, it was this idea of first, and we were more radical in this project. No? In Laborda, we suddenly started to introduce this idea of the room that can be interconnected and also in a discontinuous possibilities. But here we were totally much more radical. Suddenly, kind of democratizing the south facade. All the flats are facing the south facade, and we are having 2 disconnected rooms in each floor in the north facade. So suddenly, this idea of the discontinuous living is established in all the floors, but also this idea of the cluster living. So how this structure can be manipulated and can operate in different ways, establishing one of the floor plans as a cluster living. So also, and this is also a process of looking how the regulation, how we can skip the regulation again, no? And something that we are working nowadays. This is kind of this idea of kind of turning like the structures in this idea, like sharing all these terraces in the southeast, southwest facade, and here. Use the laser, and here these rooms that are kind of allows to have bigger flats, kind of with the studios, with also this kind of rooms that can be as part of even bedrooms, but kind of in a disconnected way. And I think that arriving to that, I finish. Just saying, just as the last part, the last kind of a slide, this idea that basically we have a lot of work. So we have been working with the municipality in this idea how to develop these public policies, but there is few plots available. So we are just managing how we can introduce cooperative housing in empty buildings, in a dispersed flats strategy, even with buildings that they are already inhabited. So just kind of thinking creatively, many strategies to make the city kind of livable for everybody. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, both. And now we have, as you can see the screen, we have Anna Puigjaner from New York. No, he's in New York. She's going to open the discussion, and we'll open our discussion, and afterwards, if you want, you can ask from the public. But Anna is going to start.
Yeah, thank you very much, Moisés, to pass me the word. And thank you for our guests. It has been a pleasure to hear both projects. And I think it's a very unique opportunity to have them, both projects on the same table and both offices on the same discussion. And I'm going to start with a very easy question, and I'm going to go into more critical demands afterwards. So I'm just going to start talking about precedents. And I think that this is a very, very basic question. And actually, Cristina already mentioned some of them. Understanding that projects do always relate with the context. And here I'm using the term context beyond a territory. So beyond, a locality, a particular locality. Here I'm referring the context to its historical sense. So I would love to hear more about your precedents. Which have been your precedents? Actually, Cristina was mentioning Copenhagen co-housing, but also we have very good precedents in Switzerland. But as Moisés mentioned at the beginning, Catalonia as a territory was very fruitful in cooperative housing. So it has been not only in cooperative housing, but cooperatives in general. How to manage agriculture, how to manage food production, and many others. So probably my question would start with Cristina, but asking Cristina, how do you relate your cooperative project with the precedents that you had in Catalonia? Which are the differences and the similarities, and how you see the future of cooperative living in Catalonia? so basically, I'm interested to know the difference from that time to our actual time. For those of you that you're not that acquainted with cooperative tradition in Catalonia, it had a huge peak during the 70s. Actually, a very interesting moment when our dictatorship was ending. So it was even during the dictatorship times that those cooperatives were extremely strong due to, among other reasons, the relation with banking at the time. So banks were extremely active promoting cooperative living. In the case of B+, my question would be, I would love to hear more in relation with Berlin itself. And as you already start mentioning, there's a precedent of types of ownership. So for me, for instance, I would love to hear more historical precedents, but also probably more than in relation with housing, in relation with land ownership. And how do you see it evolving? So how do you see the future in Berlin in relation with different types of ownership?
Can I start with the first question? So I think it's really interesting, this idea about kind of the references, but it's curious because what in a way we were really critical with cooperativism from the 70s, because basically the most part of the housing stock promote and develop in this moment was kind of, basically they were cooperative as a kind of a device, as a kind of a mechanism of construction. So basically there were mechanisms to reduce the cost. So it was called housing cooperative, but basically mostly there were cooperatives of construction. And after the construction, they dissolve the cooperative and they divide the ownership. So here we broke a possibility of management, but it was one of them in El Prat de Llobregat that since the 70s they established the cooperative also as a way of management. And despite it was individual ownership, they in a way continue the cooperative, and they were almost as a kind of a neighborhood, and through the cooperative they started to have common areas and give services to the neighbors. And in the 70s they need kind of childcare services, schools, but now they are in a way kind of the cooperative, it's caring kind of the elderly people, no? Because basically mostly part of the members nowadays they are really kind of old. But this is not really typical. So there were also some experiences in Almaresma, Mataró, but that was not. So precisely we wanted in a way to establish a new narrative, and in a certain moment even we are trying to define that La Borda, for example, is a mixed cooperative of housing and consumers, because in a way, and users, consumers, and it's because we wanted to put the focus on the use of the housing, not the construction itself. So that's why there is kind of a controversial about kind of the reference from the 70s, but it was really important, and I think that they are really present in kind of the minds and the culture and the history, but suddenly kind of when you started to understand kind of the mechanisms, you realize how the potential of a moment to kind of blocking the possible speculation was not really used, no? But at the same time, I think that this also, as I was saying, the heritage and the tradition, it was something essential to understand where social economy is nowadays, and this is kind of it's the starting point for us. But when we are talking about the references, I was also saying about the SAL as this idea of that it was a process where it was involved the state, but also the users and the technicians in a really specific way. So when we were looking about references, it was kind of we started from the model, from the process, from architecture, and this idea of the popular was also really important. That's also, I'm talking about the corralas, for example, which was a kind of a traditional popular typology of the south of the Spain. So in Laborda, it was kind of a moment where we were kind of entering from different, and I think it's quite difficult to say kind of one reference, no? But, well, I think that more or less I kind of answer a bit. Sorry, it was quite too long.
I hope I remember the whole question. I made some notes. So the first thing, you asked about the context in Berlin. And there are Baugruppen, and like the cooperatives that were just presented are kind of like present in Berlin as well. But from, I would say, for us as an office, it is more, or like our focus is more on building the next generation of references, let's say. So like with the models we're building, or with showing that it is possible to build this very, like, let's say, empty structures, that this is kind of like giving other architects the prototype at hand to go into this direction. Like one thing I wrote down, like from the other presentation we heard before, is the market imposed standards. And I think that's a super, like a very important point that was made. Like with our projects, that is something as well we try to break down, or like just to erode this illusion of luxury, or like what you kind of like are supposed to need, let's say. So like for us, it's more like building the next generation of references, like showing what is possible by just expanding the laws in a way. I mean, for Brandenburg Plus overall, I think we were able to build certain things because Arno was the client. And that is something very important that needs to be added as well. Like, because if you have a client that is willing to push the laws in Germany, it's possible that you can just do things as long as the client signs it, let's say. So it's way easier, but it really helped to establish some things, like, for example, the stairs. We built this at Brunnenstraße, and you can see the stairs reoccurring in other projects because people saw it and like had an example to show. So for us, it's the other way around, as we're experimenting a lot, and it's not the classical idea of a cooperative we're building in. And then, like, I'm jumping to the Berlin overall perspective. I would say, like, in Berlin, I think it's very interesting that after the fall of the wall, there was this squatting movement. So you had this kind of like cooperative living together, caring and maintaining buildings strongly. And this is very ingrained in the city. Maybe you heard about, yesterday, I think there was kind of like a squatted house that is still existing in the Riga Straße in Berlin, like kind of like the a real estate investor bought the house, and the squatters are still in there. So this kind of like scene is still existing. But at a certain point of time after the fall of the wall, it was very strong, and it even enabled projects or buildings to exist longer because the people cared about the buildings. And I think this is a very interesting point of view on buildings overall, because now the situation in Berlin, like, it's basically not possible to buy land anymore without then putting the price so high to get the revenue you need to kind of like pay back for the land. So what we are actually trying to focus on is more the maintaining and using the structures that are already existing, because the city is already quite dense, let's say. There are only a few plots that are still being able to be built on. So yeah, I think that's the context, if I answered your question correctly, or the way you wanted it to be answered, that we're having in Berlin at the moment.
No. I got the best answers possible. I think it's very important to acknowledge that listening to your answers is clear, like there's that there in both territories there's an heritage of appropriation of squatting. Also in Barcelona, we do have a long culture of squatting. So I think that both cities are very fruitful for community engagement, for collective occupation, and I think that's essential. I understand this will to look to the future. That was also my question, like how do you refer to the past, but also how you see the future. And clearly, I think that Angelika, listening to you, like how you talk about trying to break down biases, I think that that's essential, because one of the conflicts when dealing with communities and when dealing with collectives is that usually cliches and biases are just perpetuated. And I'm saying this because one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that housing has been traditionally used as a tool to shape social structures and biases based on gender, race, age, etc. And not only the market, but us as citizens, we have the tendency not to be aware of those biases, not to be aware of the need of looking through the other eyes, right? And I'm referring here to Cristina when she was mentioning, for instance, the need to include feminist perspectives within housing design. And I'm saying this because when it's accepted or not, socially speaking, starts in the house and how the house is defined. The fact that, as also both of you mentioning, right, most of our housing market is defined for the nuclear family, in which the living room is the center of the house, sometimes now attached to the kitchen, sometimes not even. But this space of gathering reinforced the idea of the sociability of the family itself, thinking that actually a nuclear family would be inhabiting those spaces. I think it's very interesting to both engage with participation, but at the same time, try to break down those biases. So here my question for both of you is, which biases, social cliches, you tried to break down, and which others you couldn't, and how, architecturally speaking? And this question, obviously, for Angelika, I know that the answer is pretty clear. Like, you have those windows that are facing, public terraces, and it's very violent if you think about it, like living in front of a terrace that anyone is gonna pass by, right? So that, for instance, is a clear tool to break down certain biases, to understand that the privacy of the house has to be completely private in order to perpetuate certain habits within the family, right? The idea of the family within the private realm. But I'm sure that there are a lot of other architectural tools that you design in order to break down those social biases. So this is my question for both of you.
So I'll start this time, as you already answered my question half the way, let's say. Yeah, this is actually like how to break these biases is really like how the formation of the object or the formation of the architecture in the end is really the last step of breaking the bias, let's say, what we're trying to do, like on one hand with public and private spaces, as you already described, but as well with this very feminist term of, let's say, production, reproduction, like of the space itself. I explained before that or in the case of the Terrassenhaus, there is only the core, and then you have open space. So you basically, you yourself as a family, as a single person, as a, I don't know, community living together, you yourself need to define what is like productive, reproductive space. How do we deal with it? How do we share it? So it's basically, we're moving the responsibility of this care work decision, let's say, into the hands of the user. And further on, it's actually as well, like the biases we're talking about are also ingrained in our legal system, in the financial system we're living in. So with this step of not having walls inside, you're giving the chance, at least that's a German finance and tax law now, very technical, but you cannot deduct money for your home space, but you can deduct money for office space. So as long as you kind of like can declare your space office space, you're like legally preferred, let's say. And this is as well what happens in the Terrassenhaus. Basically, there is the option of having like housing, but it is like seen as office space. So this, like, I don't know if it's understandable, if I explained it understandably, but this is kind of like somehow playing with these biases, let's say, or like, tapping into this direction that we're doing actually very actively.
In the case of Cristina, I'm obviously the laundry, right? It would be like my first answer, but I'm pretty sure there are other devices.
Now? Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that the question is really important because for us, we had realized the responsibility that we have to make people aware about the instrumentality of architecture, to also even starting by analyzing their previous home, for example, but also how challenging this is. No? Also, some of our current some kind of discussions, it's how to start a project, which kind of methodologies, which kind of materials can we provide to, in a way, make people more aware and empower them in also, because it's something that maybe we are really used to that, but suddenly, well, it's kind of a long process to transfer this kind of knowledge, and also sometimes the architecture asks for another temporalities. No? So this idea of the discussion, it's something that we feel it's essential. At the same time, I have to say that we are really privileged because we are always working with communities which I think that they are really political. And as you were saying, for example, about the squatting movement in Barcelona, I would say that almost the 30% of Laborde has been squatting in several kind of moments in their life. So there are kind of interesting starting point, no? Kind of cultural and kind of personal backgrounds that are over on the table to work with, no? But at the same time, even being many of them really political, suddenly when they are talking about their homes, they are connecting with this kind of something that came since the childhood to your mind, the idea of the family, your personal experiences. So we are always kind of challenging also people and in a way kind of pushing that. But in terms of kind of strategies, of course, this idea of making really visible the reproductive, like the laundry in the middle of the multipurpose room, the idea of a courtyard, like all the windows around, this idea also kind of from the challenging the privacy itself, but also even with the distribution of the homes, which people were kind of struggling where to even to kind of allocate the living room because it's the same size as the bedroom, and the kitchen is in the corridor. So, and here we also sometimes feel even a little guilty because we make people really kind of destabilizing a bit, no? So, and here also, we came also with readings about Robin Evans and morality, because people said, like, wow, the doors are kind of with glass. So it's all the time kind of challenging certain parts. But at the same time, just to finish, I'm now working in a feminist cooperative with a group of women, transgender, and suddenly it's also a process to realize even how, when we are talking about the gender approach, a feminist approach, that we have also a lack of knowledge somehow, no? So it's of course more and more present, these queer theories, etc., but suddenly we are always kind of talking in a kind of a dichotomy, no? Kind of the reproductive and the productive, etc., but suddenly they are introducing kind of new biases and kind of new lines, which are even for us kind of unsafe zones and really interesting zones. No? So, well, that's basically said that we have a responsibility, but also the community plays a huge role, no, to define all those spaces.
Yes, obviously, I think it's important also to probably, I'm going to address the next question and then I'm going to pass it to Moisés. So Moisés, be ready. And maybe when Moisés feels like open it to the public, we can open it. I think it's important. I think Christina's comment is extremely important. Obviously, we are in the fourth or fifth movement of feminism. So, we have to acknowledge that the third wave was the one claiming equity between men and women. And that binary that, is a discourse from the 60s, 70s, it's definitely way historical. Here, let me clarify, when I talk about feminist, I'm talking about feminists including queer theories. And actually, always most of our feminist leaders do claim that that actually is more or less the same. But let's don't go to that direction, because I want to come back to, and here it's a critical question about the idea of freedom. And I'm going to leave with the worst question, probably more critical, because I don't even have the answer. But both projects do have a sense of freedom. And even myself at the office, we do claim that the user, we do claim that architecture needs to be open-ended, that needs to be resilient, that the user needs to finish the space, and the space has to be able to be mutable and able to allow to change through time. In the case of La Borda, for instance, this wish to allow the user to define their own spaces, it's defined thanks to the a very clear and smart organization of the structure that allows any organization within the apartments to happen, answering to the inhabitants' needs. In the case of the terrace house, the idea probably is more related with this this will to understand the housing as an infrastructure that can allow anything to happen whenever, wherever. But both they do have this sense of freedom. We have to be very critical also with the sense of freedom that now it's claimed in architecture, and I'm part of the movement, so I'm one of the guilty ones among us. But I have the feeling that we have to be very careful, because freedom, as we know, has been a slogan of late capitalists. The idea of be yourself, and similar sentences are commonly used by companies to, sell commodified objects and increase industrial production. All the while, obviously, empowering individualism. So the question here is why do we have to talk about, or why do we think that this is important in architecture? Second is, how do you deal with the relation between individuality and collectivity? And Cristina started to address it before, right? And I think that that's a crucial question when dealing with collective housing.
I could add also to this question another thing that I'm very interested in is how form oblige of a kind of intimacy. Both of the projects have, at least from Southern Europe, some problems or some questioning in some way the intimacy. This building built like a mountain is like kind of terraces in a mountain, but you have to pass through the circulation. You have to pass through other people. But in the case of La Borda, it reminds a little bit of old like structures like the family stair or also the corralas, where intimacy is difficult. So I can't imagine a lot of intimacy inside the building, no? So how do you have dealt with intimacy regarding the form of the projects, no? Connecting with Anna's question also.
Do you want to start?
I can
Angelika?
start. I would actually like to argue that the Terrassenhaus is very much not so much about freedom, because there's quite some restriction implied, and a lot of people that moved in couldn't deal too well with the publicity of the space. It's like you're not allowed to have this, I don't know, maybe it's a very German thing, but people like to have this garden border lines. I mean, it's all people that were willing to move into the house and that knew what was coming. They saw the design. So it was like hand-picked people that moved in. But still, within the first week, you saw this like small wall, like not walls, but people started to put the trees in a certain way so that would kind of like force people to not come too close to the window. But due to the fire regulation, that's how we like made sure that there can't be anything. They had to put the stuff back so that the terrace itself is free. I mean, there can be a table or something removable for a while, but then you need to put it back again. So the place is forced to be public. So let's say, I mean, there is a lot of freedom inside your space, so you can do whatever you want, but the basic structure on how, or like the basic argument of giving the space back is ingrained in the building.
I would answer the same, in the sense that since the beginning, we also used to say that we build housing to build community, because it was also a process to realize from the individual needs to the collective needs, and also a process of kind of transition and understanding that suddenly you are building kind of a collective house. And in this process also of realizing the other, in a way, you are kind of limiting or kind of understanding also kind of your freedom. And at the same, so it's also a way to understand even in the conviviality phase that kind of the conflict, it's neat, it's welcome, and the freedom, in a way, it's also kind of has kind of different kind of spheres, no? So, and even the architecture, we understand kind of this openness or this kind of infrastructure allows to be changed through time in different scales and different spaces. And I think that there is the freedom inside the unit, also related with a bit about this idea that there was a need in the process to understand that your limit of your unit is a bit your space of privacy. Despite there is windows like open to the courtyard, but here is where the curtains enter as kind of also the individual decision to decide. No, but once the limit of the unit, all the other spheres are going to be discussed and decided. So I think that. This idea of the freedom, it's also something controversial. And I think that the freedom to decide collectively how to organize during the pandemic was something interesting, and it's a collective kind of freedom. But at the same, as Angelika was saying, no, there is also certain kind of regulations in terms of conviviality, but also in terms of the architecture. We also produce a kind of a manual how to use the units, what can be done and what cannot be done. Also, even for the environmental performance, you have to use the shadow system, or you have to control the ventilation in winter. So we are always confronting, but once you are deciding, as you have the decision, I think so you have the freedom to decide which are kind of the norms. And I think this is something that for us it's interesting, no? Establishing the limits, and then like the activities and the life, it's kind of organized. No? So.
Just one more thought I would like to add. It is, of course, as you said before, it's a question of how do you define freedom? Whose freedom? It's a very neoliberalist idea of freedom we have, that the individual needs to have the maximum freedom, but it's as well the other people's freedom to use space. So it's like, and that, yeah, I mean, depends very much, and it's a very philosophical question that I'm posing now, but that is very much about how you see freedom itself.
Yes, and I was thinking also this idea that, in a way, projects like Labor born also as a kind of a reaction against kind of the individualization, no, and atomization of the society. So also it's kind of in the center, no, all these kind of discussions. So, yeah.
Okay.
I would recommend to hear and read Lila Abu Lugot, who talks about the idea of freedom and from the feminist perspective, and precisely how from the Western world we always talk about to free, the women, and this kind of idea of freedom. With actually, ultimately, freedom doesn't exist. So freedom is always a cultural context. So what we understand as being free, it means that we are comfortably as part of a cultural construct that has a lot of restraints. So, Moisés, your turn.
No, I would like also to pass the microphone to the public. Has anybody any question to both Cristina and Angelika? No? Because we have time, or we have to. Okay. Any questions? No. Anna, any questions? We can stop here, or are you tired?
No, we have 5 minutes more. I would
Okay.
love to come back to your question, actually, about the relation between space and community. And I think that that's crucial. In particular, in relation with, for instance, in the case of, but I want to come back to his question, because with Moisés, we were talking this previously, is how important is basically how the space that architecture defines, the proportions of the space, the depth of the space, or even the organization of the units in order to define a community, or in order even to define which kind of uses can happen. The fact, for instance, that in terrace house, the spaces are too deep just to be housing, that already forces to merge housing with other uses in order to use actively the building, right? And so that case allows us to understand that, how deep is your building is already going to influence how it's inhabited.
Was it a question? Do we answer? I would, if we're not answering, I would
I
just
was
like
thinking
to
it was
add
for
one
Angelika,
more
sorry.
thing.
So
When you're referring to space and community, like you just referred to the very spatial layout, like how deep is the ground floor plan? I don't know, whatever. I think what is very crucial and what we are looking into at the moment is very much structural and organizational design. What actually we already heard way more in detail than we worked yet. But I think this is very much could be as well a core competence for the next generation of architects, because it's so important how you set up, or as we see with the Terrassenhaus, some things didn't work out because the organizational structure, or like how is the place going to be rented, how high can the rents be, or how low should they be, that was not set with the client. So I think it's super crucial as well to really establish structures on, design these structures actually, and like legally fix them as well when you're working with private clients, not only with collaboratives, to have like the right setup to design like space that enables community, that enables the individual, whomever, but to have this very base layer that kind of like helps you with the whole project.
regarding the question that you raised, Anna, I'm thinking that what we also think nowadays is just the relation with the city, because of course each plot is different, but not even about the form, but also the programs, the idea of how we can understand infrastructures for the city and how we can hybridize. So this idea of understanding after the pandemic, no, what kind of programs can we have, how also this is going to affect the kind of the working from home. So the idea that we can expand all this kind of the limits of the building to the surrounding. So the idea of the passage, the corridor, and and I was amazed with the project that also the terrace house, this idea of kind of a new public space. No? So it's kind of in a moment that all these projects also have to make the city, and which kind of new cities can we have? So even more about kind of these limits about the unit and the collective, it's also about the kind of the collectives and the public, no? And here that I think that it's kind of challenging, and I think that many kind of new infrastructures and how kind of this hybridity kind of in the different levels, and which kind of programs can be introduced, and how this can be also kind of equipments for the city, and also how come the cooperative can be open to the surroundings, and how it's the form that will kind of help. So I think that specifically, I think that the Angelika, the terrace project is kind of challenging kind of this limit, and I think it's something that in Barcelona, which is kind of super compact and dense, we are in a way kind of thinking and discussing, no? Kind of also from the kind of the urban impacts of the building.
I think it's very important what Christina's you're saying, and actually to be aware and to acknowledge that I think that the relation with the government, and in this case, I'm talking about the City Council of Barcelona, is essential. And I think that we have to acknowledge that the value of all the work that you have been doing from the office, from the collective, from the community that came from a grassroots movement, started to be linked with municipal projects, and that's essential to grow. And that's what we are seeing with Lacol, which is extremely interesting and in many ways. First, because I think that when you talk about one cooperative group, that's one particularity. When you start extending that to a metropolitan and city level, I think a lot of, for instance, the things about in relation with biases, in relation with the link with the urban space, all those things can be addressed. So here I'm basically always, I'm at the end claiming the necessity to be linked with city councils and governments in order to have a larger impact. Otherwise, we do rely on private initiatives that sincerely are very rare. It would be fantastic that we would be in another position, but that's not the case. Usually the collective and the public is always surveilled by the city council mostly. So it's essential that we need to be in dialogue with them.
Can I just add one very short sentence? In accordance with what you just said, Anna, I think it's highly important to as well engage in lawmaking or legal processes. We just see in Germany, we had very recently a Verfassungsgerichtsurteil, a legal decision on how to proceed with ecological restrictions like CO2, highness, this kind of stuff, and it has enormous impact. So this highest court in Germany decided something, and now it kind of goes down all the way. And it's going to be the same, or it should be the same for housing policies. So there is a huge gap where architects could be more active, because we know about what happens at the very end, and there is a lot of potential to kind of ingrain the right things, whatever the right things are, that's another point of view, but to enormously have an impact in the design at the very, very beginning before you even start design.
And in the meantime, we change policies that, as Cristina was mentioning in her presentation, they are very slow to change. We have to be creative, as you mentioned, using fire escapes in order to ensure that that's public, right? And that's not permanently occupied. So yeah, very smart.
And it's curious that in the case of Barcelona, I think there has been a young generation of architects that has pushed even the town hall to change the competitions. So there is a new generation of housing that has nothing to do with the previous one, that is based on the work and the young architects as Mayo and other studios, no? And this is because we have a good town hall now. No, I think is perceptive of what the architects are doing, or how they are changing the typologies. No.
And I think that kind of, so I think it was a kind of a discussion, a current discussion, at least in the neighborhood and also in the cooperative movement, no? So this relationship, because I think there is a kind of interesting tension that you have to work and you have to kind of, in a way, have a certain autonomy also in order to even to resist certain political changes, but at the same time, it's essential to have the opportunity that with this, with the possibilities that the new government, well, the current government is offering, in a way, to consolidate. No, so it's a kind of a dichotomy and a kind of interesting context that there is a synergy and a kind of a retroalimentación. I don't know how to say it in English. No, so at the same time. It's kind of a constant feedback, and you are kind of affecting policies, and in a way you also are kind of affecting your narrative. But there is also some, and we learned that also from Uruguay, for example, so that it's essential to be autonomous, because otherwise certain kind of political changes can kind of. So, but of course in Barcelona, I think has been incredible moments for experimentation, and many things are coming, no? So also in terms of redistribution of care, and how this is also linked with this kind of housing strategies, new protocols of management, and at the sense is about the kind of the discipline, no? So that I think, as Angelika was saying, no, how we can involve since from policing, etc., and it's about talking about also the role of the architect, no, at the end, which is also, I think it's interesting to understand this link between property and also the discipline as a way that even to conclude. No?
Okay. Any questions from the public again? If not, I think we can close. Thank you very much. Also, for me as a male, it's a pleasure to have a panel with 3 women. So it's something that is more common, unfortunately, no, than it used to be. And thank you, the 3, Anna, of course, Angelika, and Cristina. We closed. Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.